Okay, this is going to be a bit of a different video, just sort of a reaction or commentary to something that Apple recently put on YouTube. Actually, I believe it's on their developer website as well, but they've uploaded it to YouTube. Bring your PC and console games to Mac. I think that's what it's called, something like that. It's not published, here it is. It's not published by Apple, it's published by Apple developer. Clearly this is intended for developers, of course. I am not a developer, I'm not a programmer in any way, so maybe a lot of this is just gonna go over my head, but I still wanted to see the presentation all the same, and we'll just maybe react to some of it. And what I'll do is I'll essentially stop the video every so often just to comment on it.
And I'm here to talk to you about
and we will turn off the closed captioning.
To metal. I'm assuming you have a PC or console game and you want to make it part of the...
And clearly we can see this is a bit of a different presentation than maybe you're used to seeing with Apple's events, right? This isn't made for the general public. This is for a smaller subset of their users, that being developers, so...
catalog of titles.
In fact, it's even a smaller subset of even the developers. They're targeting game developers specifically. The big takeaway here is just the fact that Apple is trying to encourage developers to bring more games to Mac. This is very important for people who enjoy playing games on Mac because this tells us that Apple is clearly interested in moving in this direction, right? Seeing more games come to the Mac.
Apple Silicon means that you have a strong baseline of advanced rendering features, and knowing the capability of each device, you can give your players tune settings for their Mac. And then finally, debugging and optimizing for performance before you release.
It's kind of fun seeing this process map here, or flow chart, if you will. I create a lot of flow charts and process maps for work, so it's nice seeing. I mean, this is a very, very, very high level, but they're essentially showing how to get a Windows game from Windows potentially onto the Mac, and we can see that they don't launch until all these other steps have been performed. And then once they launch, in theory, it's available on the Mac, then they start debugging and stuff before it actually gets released to the public.
With the help of the Game Porting Toolkit, you can now see your games first seen.
And this is the important bit right here. So Apple came out with their Game Porting Toolkit. Was it last year, maybe the year before? I haven't played around with it. I know a lot of people online, those in the Mac gaming community, they've been playing around with it a lot. Essentially what you can do with it is you can take a Windows game and then load it into the Game Porting Toolkit on your Mac, and it's supposed to essentially make the game run on Mac with very little intervention from you, and that's what they're showing here. So instead of waiting for all these other steps to be performed in order for you to launch and then start debugging the game, with the Game Porting Toolkit, you can essentially just take your Windows game in its current state, and then with the Game Porting Toolkit, it will translate the code and get it running on Mac really early. So you can kind of skip the other steps, essentially. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is going to work perfectly, but it kind of gets you most of the way there so that you can at least see the game running on Mac. And I know a lot of people have been doing this online, and there's a big list of games that I believe people are keeping in order to show which ones Game Porting Toolkit works with and which ones do not.
But first, you have a Windows game. So let's work out how we run it on Mac. Earlier today, Alan talked about how the Game Porting Toolkit includes an emulation environment so that you can experience how well your game runs on Mac. The evaluation environment means Remedy could use the Game Porting Toolkit early in the porting process to evaluate
they're showing control here.
Control would run on Apple Silicon. With this, they were able to then experiment and find out how technologies like Metal FX would help them improve the performance of Control. For example, for Remedy to run Control, the first step is to copy the game into a bottle in Crossover. A bottle is what Crossover uses to store Windows applications.
So it's interesting that Apple is showing this. So Crossover is an application that you can pay for and install. I've never used it, so I don't know too much about it. But as they're showing here, essentially with Crossover, you can play Windows games on your Mac. But I'm not sure if it leverages the Game Porting Toolkit or not, because Crossover has been available longer than the Game Porting Toolkit has existed.
When the game starts running, it's using Game Porting Toolkit to provide the Windows emulation, and the game is able to run on Mac.
Yeah, so he just said right there, so even though they're using Crossover, Crossover is leveraging the Game Porting Toolkit.
The emulation environment of the Game Porting Toolkit translates your Windows binary and its use of Windows APIs for input, audio, networking, file system use, and of course, graphics. All the modern graphics features, such as GPU-driven pipelines, SIMD operations, and even older features such as tessellation and geometry shaders are all supported and translated. Once that you know your game can run really well on Apple Silicon without any code changes, let's talk about how Game Porting Toolkit simplifies your porting journey.
It's also interesting, we can see over here on the side, I'm not logged into YouTube here, but we can see over on the side, it's recommending other Apple developer videos from recent, but several of them have to do with gaming. Like the start here, press start game development on Apple platforms. That was streamed. Here's another one. So discover game development on Apple platforms. That one was from 8 days ago. Another one here, chart your game's course to Apple platforms. Again, 8 days ago. I mean, what this is evidence of is that Apple clearly has an interest in game development on the Mac.
First step is porting your source to build for Mac. To get graphics on screen starts with porting your render as source code. Metal is an Objective-C API. If you've not used Objective-C before, it can seem like there's a lot of extra work here, right? Like including a whole new language. This is where Metal CPP comes in. Metal CPP uses C to call directly into the Objective-C runtime. This is the exact same mechanism that the Objective-C compiler would use to execute Objective-C methods.
All right, so this is getting a bit more technical than I would want to comment on. I'd be curious to know how many people are sitting in this room right now and actually interested in bringing their games to the Mac.
And the function constants and frame buffer fetch sample, Metal 4 focuses on the best CPU performance for the API and aligns closer to other APIs like DirectX and Vulkan.
It's quite an interesting presentation. This is completely a side note. But it's quite an interesting presentation that they have here. So they have this very, very ultra wide display, and they're using the entire length of the display. So right now they have text on the far left and the presenter is standing on the right. And there's been several times throughout the presentation where the presenter has had to actually move prior to the next slide being loaded so that he can get out of the way of whatever text or image is about to be displayed. So the presenter knows, I mean, either through practice beforehand or some kind of cues that we cannot see, knows where to stand in order to get out of the way. But it's interesting because when these slides are loading, they're filling up the whole display. But when we see this, for example, when they're showing us the actual display as opposed to the live presentation, it's filling our display, which is not an ultra wide. So it's interesting how it's translating this into this. It's like changing the aspect ratio of the presentation depending on what's happening. Again, this is getting pretty technical here, so just kind of skipping through.
Optimize.
Just wondering if there's anything that's going to be more interesting to the average person.
The summary page provides an overview of the Metal workload with statistics and insights. To better understand the structure of the workload, use the dependencies viewer. This visualizes the workload in a graph. Starting from a bird's eye perspective, you can
wow, that's cool.
And see the various passes and their output resources. In a short amount of time, you can scan across the entire workload, and when you find areas of interest, you can seamlessly take a closer look. In the attachments viewer, you can zoom in, select one pixel, and then click the debug button in the bottom right corner to start the shader debugger. And the navigator shows the lines of code that ran for that pixel, as well as the function calls. And then, when there are for loops, you can see the variable values at each stage through the loop iterations too.
The amount of detail here is
inspect the values
crazy.
From surrounding pixels running the same shader.
This is one of the problems with getting into something like let's say you're new to programming, to coding, you want to develop your own game. I mean, some people, they probably get excited by how much depth there is in this sort of career, in this sort of world. For someone like me, though, I just look at this and I'm just completely overwhelmed to have to start from the bottom and kind of work your way up so that what we're looking at right here makes sense to you. To me, it feels like it would be such an overwhelming task, but I know some people relish in it. It's just interesting to see the level of depth.
And all of these tools are a fundamental part of what makes Metal Metal. And now that you know more about Metal and all the tools to help you port...
So this might be a bit more interesting, start to port.
Earlier today, Alan showed the game porting sample code, included in the Game Porting Toolkit. The example game that ships in this package makes a great basis for your game, and you can reuse or replace each of the subsystems in the example.
They just said the example game that ships with this package. I wonder what example game
you should really look at
they're
for
talking
more detail
about
on porting your renderer. There's a lot of inspiration in every metal sample to keep you warm as you adopt metal.
I see some people are taking pictures of the screen with their phone. I don't know, maybe that's a good sign.
Toolkit's evaluation environment.
Maybe that's a good sign, you know, people are interested in getting their games on Mac.
Metal CPP and Metal Shader Converter will help you get started with Metal in your renderer, and Metal supports all of the features you need to port and enhance your game for Apple Silicon with a strong suite of tools in the background.
I mean, the first point here I think is one of the biggest takeaway. You know, if you can simply just turn on a Mac and download your game and then load it in Crossover or Game Porting Toolkit or whatever it is you need to do, and within, you know, less than 30 minutes or so, your game is running on a Mac, I mean, it clearly underscores how easy on the surface it could be to develop for a Mac. And at that point, it really makes one question, I mean, why are they not doing it? Why are we not seeing more and more and more games come to the Mac if it is this simple, right? How large of a studio does it take to create, you know, a significant game? It takes a large studio, but you don't necessarily need to have this massive team within your studio in order to develop that game for Mac anymore, if you can develop it for Windows first and then use these tools like Crossover and Game Porting Toolkit to essentially get the game running on Mac almost, you know, within a day. And then maybe it just takes a little bit of customizing here and there, optimization and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you don't need an entire team necessarily, or a large team, in order to develop your game for Mac if it's this simple. If a studio is developing games for Mac, I find that typically that's where they're targeting. They're not always developing for a bunch of different platforms. If it's a mobile game studio, for example, they're developing for Android and the iOS or iPadOS App Store. That's basically how far they're going. I mean, you rarely see developer studios, certainly in the past anyways, where they would develop it for multiple platforms, right? That's why oftentimes when you see a game getting developed for PlayStation, not only is it necessarily an exclusivity thing, but sometimes it's just, you know, why are they going to put the effort into developing one version of the game for PlayStation, one version of the game for Xbox? It's just that little bit extra time, right? If it doesn't pay off, you would never do it. But if the platform can make this so seamless where there's really no reason to avoid doing it, to avoid bringing your game to another platform, even if it doesn't pay off right off the start. I mean, a lot of people are not bringing their games to Apple's platforms because at the end of the day, there are not a lot of gamers on Mac. Certainly not when you compare it to PC or the console platforms. So why would you ever invest the time and resources in order to do this if there's not a high payout? Right now, nobody's developing for Apple's platforms. I'm specific to the Mac. Nobody's doing it because the return on investment is not high enough.
And then Metal samples and documentation are there to support you on your Metal journey. And while I've covered getting your renderer running on Mac, my colleague Lionel will tell you more about improving the performance of your game.
Yeah, so that's it. So as we can see on the side here, there are several videos that are about developing games for Mac. I don't know, it makes anyone who has been playing games on Mac for a while and wants to see more games come to Mac, I mean, they got to be excited by this. Apple would not be doing stuff like this if they're not pushing it, right? If they're not encouraged by making this happen on their platform. So I would say the next decade is going to be interesting for gaming on Mac. I think it's going to ramp up quickly, and it has been ramping up ever since the launch of the M series chip, but I think it's going to happen much faster if Apple keeps coming out with stuff like this. But anyways, that's it. I will see you in the next video. See you later.